It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I brew a deck list for you in my eternal goal of out-brewing your favorite Magic channel. This show and this series is a series where I bring forth to you my version 1.0, my first take at a deck list. No testing, no optimization, just my first shot list at this commander. If this is something you want to support, hit the like, man. Subscribe if you want to see some more content. Drop me a comment of what you think of this deck, what you'd want to change, what you think I should have included, what I shouldn't include, all that good stuff. But today, I feel like it's only inevitable. We get a Phyrexia set, we build Phyrexia commanders, and it's only inevitable that I've never brewed Atraxa Praetors voice before, but it felt right. It felt right in this moment to finally build Atraxa because of just how much proliferate good stuff we got in this set. This set was probably a field day for the Atraxa players and just how much we got and how much, really in all reality, we helped this deck in a lot of ways, I really think. I think the new Atraxa is fine. I had considered building the new Atraxa, but to be 100% honest, until we see battles and truly understand what a battle is, I don't know if maybe Atraxa gets better once we find out what battles are. I don't love the Atraxa is a lot like the Niv Mizzet from War of the Spark. I don't love the idea of these get X cards from the top of your deck type things on commanders. I don't know. I don't functionally understand it. Maybe I just don't see the play line yet, and maybe once we see some more things, I'll visually understand it. But the one thing I do understand about Atraxa's Praetor voice is how versatile Proliferate can be. So the concept of Proliferate is we choose a number of permanents or players, then give each of them another counter of each kind they already have. So we don't have to select an individual single counter on each of our permanents. You pick a permanent and every single counter they have, they get another one. But the cool part is we also get to proliferate on players. And that's going to come in handy with this deck because we, as much as we want to proliferate our own things, we kind of also want to proliferate to poison our opponents out. What I love about Atraxa, now that I built this deck, is I think this deck has 3 really cool ways to win the game, and you can kind of do all of them simultaneously. So that's what we've tried to do. I've tried to tip my toes in all 3 of the lakes here on the strategies, and we'll go over them in just a second. But Atraxa's green, white, blue, black for a 4/4 vigilance, flying, death touch, lifelink. So 1 keyword for each ability, or 1 keyword for each color. And at the end of your end step, proliferate. So it was very easy to start in a couple different directions with this deck. One, we got Take With All here in the first LB1 that doubles whenever we proliferate. So that's an immediate include, right? Atraxa already is going to proliferate on our end step. Well, cool. Take With All is going to do it twice. So we, in my opinion, have 3 ways we can take the strategy of this deck. Poison, +1/+1 counters, planeswalkers. Those I think are the 3 easy ways you could take this deck. All 3 of them have a functional end, and all 3 of them I think can be done really well. The planeswalkers, of course, is something we're half interested in because of Ichor Gauntlet, right? That just came out in Phyrexia LB1. Planeswalkers you control have 0 proliferate and -12 take an extra turn after this one, and then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you choose a counter on target permanent, put additional counter of that kind on that permanent. So this only will buff permanents, but that's fine because we can actually potentially get some of our planeswalkers up to ultimate a little easier. So what I've tried to do here is marry the 3 of these concepts together. +1/+1 counters, poison counters, and planeswalkers together in a way that I hope the synergies work out together to allow us to get a crescendo of the perfect storm of kind of trying to put all of our eggs in all 3 of these baskets, so that if one of these baskets fails, we can still potentially end the game with the other 2. For example, if we try to set up the toxic and we can never get through, we could fall back into the +1/+1 counters and the planeswalkers and grind our opponents out. If we try to set up the planeswalkers and they keep getting removed from the table, we can fall back into the proliferate the poison and plus one counters and find our way through that way. Although I will tell you that we should be playing enough planeswalkers and getting enough planeswalkers that won't matter too much. I think our planeswalkers are still fairly important, but our goal for all of our choices in this deck is to keep ourselves open while keeping ourselves focused. I think a lot of the cards serve double threats. A lot of them are not just this strategy or that strategy. I really think a lot of them work really well together. You know, the cool part about proliferating is that it works for all three of these strategies, not just one of them. So I think that's going to help us a lot when it comes to divvying up what we actually do. Okay. 4-color mana bases are actually kind of interesting. This is a mana base that got me really excited to build. I don't normally talk about mana bases in these episodes, but when we get up to 4 or 5 colors, I like to talk about them because I think a lot of strategy is involved in your mana base. We're playing Command Tower, City of Brass, Mana Confluence. These all tap for all 4 of our colors, right? So they're pretty important. Exotic Orchard, probably more often than not, is going to give us at least one of our colors. Interplanar Beacon. We can pay 1 into and tap to get 2 mana of any colors, and only to get Planeswalker spells. But whenever we cast Planeswalker, we get a life. This is for the Planeswalker side of our deck, and it's going to help with that. Karn's Bastion is a utility land that fits all of our deck, allowing us to pay for and tap it to proliferate. But I've chosen to go with 4 main land varieties. The fetch lands, which are going to allow us to get either the Triomes, which is our first choice because each of them tap for 1 of 3 different colors of mana, and that's going to be very important, or the shock lands, which each tap for 2, but they have dual land typing, and that's going to allow us to play our check lands, which are going to check when they come in if we have a land of each certain types. Well, considering we're always going to be going after either a tri-land or a shock land, these check lands should almost always be coming in untapped just due to the way we have this deck set up. So we don't need necessarily other land choices like the commander lands, like Sea of Clouds and those that come in untapped if we have 2 or more opponents, or things like that, because I think when we're playing 4 tri-lands, 6 shock lands, and then our 6 check lands, those 6 check lands should always be coming in untapped. That combined with these lands that tap for anything, or some utility lands, some things like Boseiju and something like Urza Saga, which is going to go get us some other things. Our land ecosystem should have no problems. Yes, we're going to run into the scenario probably sometimes where we start with the Triome in our hand and we're going to have to just flat play a Triome. But I don't think that's a bad thing considering the fact that it opens up 4 Triomes in our deck, each of them tap for 3 of the 4 colors that we need. What that actually honestly is going to do is open up into all of the possibilities that we have. By my count, we should only have 1 Triome that isn't green, and that's Rafine's Tower, which means that 3 of the 4 of our Triomes will allow us to play our ramp. So we don't mind opening up 3 of the 4 Triomes in our opening hand. And we also don't mind opening up any fetch land because any fetch land in our deck can get us any green Triome as well. So you can see there's plenty of plans here for things we can do. The other land that I actually kind of really like in this deck, because I think it does us a lot of good, is Inkmoth Nexus. For 1 mana, it can become a 1/1 creature with flying. And in fact, this can, if our opponents have no flying blockers, help us start the poison train on players from when we proliferate. So Inkmoth Nexus is pretty important. The reason I'm not playing Blinkmoth Nexus is because it doesn't have the same ability. And I think that infect is going to be important on some of our creatures to help start the poison counter train going. Okay, so I didn't pull my punches on... I didn't pull my punches really on budget for this deck. And the main reason is because you pretty much have to accept if you're playing a 4-color deck that you're going to have to spend a little bit of money on staples or things like that. This was a deck, to be 100% honest, when I started brewing it, I had no intention of ever playing Atraxa. I really intended on coming into this deck and by the end of it kind of begrudgingly getting on the video and saying, oh, well, this deck's so dumb, it's 4 colors, you do all these dirtily things. But I'm gonna be 100% honest, after building this deck, this might be actually something I'd be honestly half willing to try, because I like the proliferate, I like the planeswalkers, I like the counters, I like the poison counters, I like the way they marry together, and my hope is that maybe, just maybe, this insanity actually works when you sit down at a table. Okay, enchantments. Broker's Ascendancy gives us a counter on each creature and a loyalty counter on each planeswalker we control at our end step. Unfortunately, it doesn't say proliferate, so it won't double with Tekkathol and things like that. But what I like about Broker's Sensi is it's going to start putting counters on all of our creatures, even that don't have them. And then that's going to allow us to work into our +1/+1 strategy. And then it puts a loyalty counter on each planeswalker we control. And that starts us with our planeswalker strategy as well. Doubling Season does so many great things in this deck, doubles the amount of counters that go on our permanents. It doubles the amount of tokens we would control. We're not making a ton of tokens in this deck. But I like that we have options there. You know, we are using something like Skrelv's Hives to make tokens, and we do have other things that make tokens, but it's not the main goal of our deck. We're actually using this more for the counters than we are for the tokens. But the tokens is an added upside. Inexorable Tide, probably the most popular card, I would say, in most Atraxa lists, plus a couple of the other creatures we'll talk about in a little bit. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. This is great because it doesn't care what kind of spell it is. You're just going to proliferate. So this is great on our later turns, where we can get a couple poison counters set up, or we have a few planeswalkers. We can play our spells out and then use our planeswalkers' abilities once they've kind of raised up their loyalty. Mirari's Wake doubles up all of our mana, pumps all of our creatures. This is just kind of great because that double mana, I think, is going to end up being something that's going to help us hit our turns even harder by having access to our mana. Oath of Ajani and Oath of Teferi both are going to play towards the planeswalker side of our deck. Oath of Ajani says whenever it enters the battlefield, you put a counter on each creature you control. Well, that's great because that's going into our +1/+1 counter strategy. And then planeswalker spells you cost one less to cast. And then Oath of Teferi, arguably the better one. When it comes in, we exile another permanent we control, returns to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. The shifty thing and the cool thing about this is that let's say you have a planeswalker that you've had to unfortunately negative a few too many times, and so it's a little bit down on loyalty. Oath of Teferi can actually blink that planeswalker and bring it back in with its starting loyalty, or if we have Doubling Season out, double its starting loyalty. Now, the only problem is it comes in on the end step, but with Teferi Master of Time, we can use those abilities at any time. So we could actually get some good value out of that. Ristic Study going to help us draw some. Skrelv's Hive giving us that 1/1 might at the beginning of each turn, and Toxic 1. And then, of course, if we have opponent with 3 or more poison counters, all of our things with Toxic have a lifelink. We do have a couple creatures in the deck with Toxic, so Skrelv's Hive does actually help us out there. Smothering Tide giving us that mana. And then Sylvan Library, another way to draw. Pick what we're drawing, and I think some of the times we don't mind gaining that life to get a combo piece that we really, really, really need. Getting up into the artifacts. Arcane Signet, allowing us to tap for all of our 4 colors. Chromatic Lantern is going to let us tap for all colors, but then turns our lands into being able to tap for all 4 colors. This is important, I really think. I didn't really see the point of playing like Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and we couldn't play the World Tree because we're not in all 5 colors. So I thought Chromatic Lantern would be pretty important because it's going to turn all of our lands into being able to tap for anything. Soul Ring is a target for Urza Saga, but also is Luxior, Giada's Gift, turning one of our planeswalkers into a creature. And this is going to help us because then it is not going to be able to be attacked directly, but you can still use its abilities. Luxior is a crazy card in planeswalker decks because it kind of gives a planeswalker a lot of protection, but it also has the downside of turning it into a creature. It's kind of a double-edged sword, but a lot of the times if it's big enough, it's going to stop it from getting attacked and those kind of things. And if the planeswalker is big enough already, it could just turn into a big beater to attack with. Sword of Truth and Justice. Whenever that creature deals damage to a player, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, any one of your choice, and then proliferate. This is great because this is going to allow us to get counters on different creatures, maybe creatures that don't already have them, and then proliferate more counters onto each of our creatures. As well as protection from white and blue is relevant. Most of the best removal in Commander is white or white adjacent. So that's very helpful. That's going to help protect some creatures. The Chain Veil is going to allow us to pay for and allow us to use all of the loyalty of our abilities on each of our planeswalkers twice this turn. That's going to become really relevant, especially with something like Acre Moon Gauntlet, to allow all of them to proliferate twice to the point that we may actually be up to that -12, take another turn, and may potentially be able to take to go towards a turns win by taking enough turns to just win the game outright over value. Same thing we're going to use Magistrate Scepter for. Got to pay 4 to put a counter on it to start, but as soon as we do, we can proliferate it and then take 3 off of it to take an extra turn. So this and Acre Moon Gauntlet kind of flirt with this extra turns idea that we're kind of playing with. So does one of our planeswalkers, but we'll talk about it in a little bit. Astral Cornucopia is kind of an interesting one because At first glance, you'd think, oh, I need to dump a ton of mana into this card to make it really worth it in this deck. But if you think about it, you really need 1 mana in this to make it worth it if we're going to be proliferating. So it says it enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it, and you tap, choose a color, add 1 mana of that color for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. Well, let's say we only put it down for 3 mana, so it's just 1, but then we start proliferating. Every turn we proliferate, this cornucopia is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, tapping for more mana of one color and basically ramping us that way. So cornucopia, I think, is a really good card in this deck specifically just because how much we're trying to proliferate. And then Contagion Engine, when it comes in, we put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. For 4 mana, we proliferate and then proliferate again. So this is great because the proliferating doesn't just bolster up those -1 counters on our opponent's creatures. It also adds all of the things we already want to add on our creatures, and it does that twice for 4 mana. Yes, 10 mana is a very big investment for Contagion Engine, but I think Contagion Engine is one of those cards on the up end, the top end, that is just going to help us win more. It's going to help us push through those last few things we need to end the game. Okay, spells. This is where a lot of some where the cost is going to come for the deck, but it's also where we need to kind of fill in some of these slots to do things. For ramp, we have 3 visits, Farseek, Nature's Lore. These are 3 lands that can go get forest lands specifically, so those can go get triomes and shocks, and then Farseek can go get triomes of any other type or shocks of any other type but a forest, and that's great because that's going to cover literally every land with 8 land type in our deck. Explore is our response to not playing Rampant Growth because we're not playing any basic lands. So we need Explore to give us the opportunity on turn 2 or 3 to maybe play two triomes instead of 1, or set ourselves up for the next turn where we don't necessarily have access to Rampant Growth. Triumph of the Hordes is a game ender. If we have enough creatures that are big enough, this could end games. D-Tutor is one of our searches in the deck. Can go get absolutely anything we want and put it into our hand. It's going to become important when we're I think tutors are really important in this deck because they're going to help us figure out what game plan is the best of chance of us winning, and kind of going into that. Farewell can get rid of a lot of really cool things. The best part about this is it doesn't hit planeswalkers. So if we're going down the planeswalkers routes and we need certain artifacts or enchantments to support us, we can just pick creatures, wipe the board of creatures, and hold the board open for our planeswalkers. Phrases Outbreak seems like a really fun card in this deck and a lot of other poison decks because I think it's just going to come in handy. Each opponent gets a poison counter, so this is a way to give all of our opponents a poison counter to start, and then each creature our opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each poison counter that its controller has. Sure, the maximum is 10, so this is not going to take out big creatures, but what I think this is going to do is either start the proliferating train for us to poison out our opponents, or start making the poison even worse and knocking out those token decks in the process and kind of getting rid of their tokens. This -1/-1 gets around hexproof, it gets around indestructible, it gets around a lot of really important things. And most of the time, the token decks are going to have higher power than toughnesses, especially in combat and things like that. So Phrases Outbreak will probably help us with getting rid of some of our opponent's tokens as well. Remember, it's only creatures our opponents control, so it's going to avoid nuking our own creatures. White Sun's Twilight is going to be another nuclear option that's going to destroy all other creatures, but allow us to just leave ourselves with some mites, and those mites could help us end the game that way by just getting some poison counters on our opponents. White Sun's Twilight's kind of a board wipe, a traditional board wipe with upside. We do need to spend 7 though in order to get its full ability, which could be a lot of mana, but I don't think it will be once we get all set up. But White Sun's Twilight's also going to be effective because if we use it for 4 or less, we're just getting that many tokens, and it could be doubled by some of the other things that we're playing. So I like that for that. As far as the instants, Anguished Unmaking, Assassin's Trophy, Plowshares for removal. Psych Rift there for the mass bounce can push us through to help us win a game or stop our opponents from going off and kind of hit the reset button on their boards. Enlightened Tutor and Vampiric Tutor, 2 more tutors helping us out. You remember E-Tutor can only go for artifacts and enchantments, whereas Vampiric Tutor can go for anything. I think E-Tutor is really important because we care a lot about a lot of these cards, especially some of these guys up in here. So that becomes really important. Vampiric Tutor can go get us anything. More often than not, we're going to look at what do we have, what's going to be that card that can take us to the next level, And Vampiric Tutor is going to do that for us. Prologue Phoresis gives us each opponent a poison counter and draws us a card. This is very inefficient for a draw spell, but this is very great for giving all our opponents a poison counter. So I like this because it's going to give everybody a counter and start us on that poison counter train. Tainted Strike seems pretty important in this deck because all we need is a pretty big creature. Or we'll talk about some of the ways that we will make our +1/+1 counters turn into really good things. This with putting this on a creature that has a bunch of counters on it and giving them Tainted Strike could actually help us push through and end the game that way. Or if somebody doesn't block a creature, we can Tainted Strike it to give it Infect and maybe even kill a player out of nowhere and they may not expect it. And then Teferi's Protection to protect. Very much consider Clever Concealment in this deck for some protection. Same thing with Flawless Maneuver. But I think I understand Flawless Maneuver a lot. There's a lot of board wipes you want to get out of. The only thing I like Clever Concealment for is it protects us from Farewell, which is a board wipe I expect to see more and more often in Commander now. The question just becomes with Clever Concealment, are we going to be able to have enough creatures on a efficient enough basis to be able to Clever Conceal effectively? If we test this deck and we determine that we do, I think Clever Concealment comes in and it's a perfect choice. It can literally phase out every single permanent on your board that isn't a land, protect all your planeswalkers, protect all your creatures, protect all your artifacts and enchantments. And it could blow a game out by saving you from something that should knock you back down. So that becomes the card that probably comes in here, depending on how the deck functions. Again, I'm going based off ideas and ratios rather than physical game experience. And so that's one of those cards I think very quickly comes back in and not. Okay, we're going to talk about the creatures, then we'll talk about the planeswalkers. So creatures, Bloated Contaminator. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we proliferate. It has Toxic 1, so it could start adding poison counters to players. Cart the Lion cares about all of our planeswalkers, making their abilities cost +1 to activate. So any -1s turn into 0s, any +1s turn into +2s, and so on. Whenever it enters the battlefield or a planeswalker we control dies, look at the top 7, reveal a planeswalker and put it into our hand, put the rest on the bottom. This is great because it kind of can help us search out planeswalkers and then give us planeswalkers that bonus. Contaminant Grafter, a card that I think still looks pretty fun. It has Trample, Toxic 1. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to one or more players, proliferate. Literally one creature has to hit one player for us to proliferate. And that's great, especially once we start setting all of our multi-game plans up. And at the beginning of our end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, draw a card, then we can put a land from our hand on the battlefield. A little bit of ramp. I think it helps us a ton. Azuri, Stalker of Spheres, the new one. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3. If you do proliferate twice, that's really helpful. For 7 mana, we can bring it down and proliferate twice. Or it just says whenever you proliferate, we draw a card. And that's great too because we have things that can double proliferating. We have a lot of other things that's going to help us kind of make sure our hand is, that means on our end step when Atraxa proliferates, we're always drawing a card with the Azuri out. I think that's pretty helpful. Falcospara, Pact Weaver. This one's in here because we're talking about +1/+1 counters. We're talking about a lot of other things. And I think Falcospara is in here mainly for the +1/+1 counter strategy, but it also itself comes in with a shield counter. So we can proliferate shield counters onto Falcospara and then remove them from her, or actually removing +1/+1 counters from other creatures to play the top card, cast spells from the top of our library. This is great because it opens up our hand, gives us another card to cast. And like I said, we're probably going to be dealing with a lot of +1/+1 counters anyway. I've built some creatures into this deck for that. As well as all these other things, right? These other proliferations and the Broker's Ascendancies and things like that. I think we'll always have enough +1/+1 counters or counters laying around for Falcospara to be able to use them to play cards off the top of our library. Flux Channeler, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. This is great. It's another copy of Inexorable Tide, except this one says non-creatures, and a lot of our deck is non-creature spells. But again, I think it runs us down that way. Herald of the Secret Dreams is our win con for +1/+1 counters. Creatures with +1/+1 counters on them cannot be blocked. And we have a couple planeswalkers that will give all of our creatures +1/+1 counters. We have other ways to get our creatures +1/+1 counters. Herald of the Secret Dream is the way I see games ending. Us getting counters on creatures, making them unblockable, poisoning our opponents out, just dealing massive damage. Herald of the Secret Dreams is one of the ways we're going to do that. Ishai. Ojidai Dragon Spear, whenever an opponent casts a spell, we put a counter on it. This is one of those cards that goes great with Falco, but it's also in the air and it's just going to get huge. This is great because it's going to be hard for our opponents to deal with. And then all we need to do is Tainted Strike this, or give this that Triumph of the Hordes, or with Skrelv, we can give things toxic that might hit our opponents and start that poison spell that way. Ixal, Sign of Atraxa is probably in here only for the flavor. Flying, but it's also Flying Vigilance Toxic too, so it can start that toxic train for our friends. At the beginning of our end step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exile the top card of their library face down. You can look at those and play those. So Ixal is in here more as a toxic dealer than it is for its ability, but I think its ability is just an upside for the things we can do. Lae'zel and Vorinclex play a very similar role in our deck. And that's anytime a counter would be put on. Lae'zel puts 1 more of each of those counters on that permanent, and Vorinclex doubles the amount of counters put on that permanent. This is great for planeswalkers. This is put on so this is good for our +1/+1 counters and our planeswalkers. Lae'zel only says our creatures are planeswalkers. Vorinclex says permanent or player. So Vorinclex actually is going to double the toxic counters or the infect counters put on or poison counters put on our opponent. So Vorinclex is almost strictly better for that reason. But we're playing a little bit of redundancy, and then Vorinclex is going to allow half the counters to be put on our opponent, on permanent or players by our opponent's abilities. So that's great too, because it's going to kind of slow down our opponents. Norrin's Choirmaster, anytime a character we control enters the battlefield or attacks, proliferate. This is great because we probably don't mind attacking with Atraxa, right? She's Flying, Vigilance, Lifelink, Death Touch, unless someone is a decently big flyer or a little cheap 1/1 Death Touch flyer. Atraxa herself is going to be able to attack and deal a decent amount of damage, so I think Norrin's Choirmaster helps us a lot with that. Our boy Skittles is in the deck, Skithrix, the Blight Dragon, Flying Infect, black to have it gain haste, and then double black to regenerate it. Skittles is a great creature in this deck because it helps us definitely start spreading around those poison counters to proliferate out our opponents that way. This is one of those creatures that almost by itself is going to help our proliferate plan for poison counters. Skrelv, Toxic 1, it can't block, just like all the might tokens that we could create, but for Phyrexian White and tap, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1, hexproof from that color, and cannot be blocked by creatures of that color. This is great because if we have an opponent who only has a certain color of creatures able to block, or maybe they're playing a flyers that can only have white or blue or red flyers, we can send one of our flyers like Skittles or Atraxa into that player and get some damage. And for giving it Toxic 1, we know for sure that a poison counter is going to go on. But in the case of Skittles, it would actually give it more poison counters as well. So you could see this. Scrub is going to help us with getting some creatures through. Spark Double can come down as a copy of any creature or any planeswalker who you control, except it's not legendary, and it comes with a +1/+1 counter or an additional loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker. This has so much potential in our deck. This can copy Tekkathal. This can copy Atraxa. This can copy any other creature we have. This can copy any planeswalker we have. Spark Double is a jack of all trades in that way in this deck, and I think it makes it even better than I've seen in some decks. I had heavily considered Sakashima as well. The only problem with Sakashima is it only copies creatures, and I think we want that variability. I think we really want the ability to copy a creature or a planeswalker, because let's say, for example, we have something like, we have something like Kazmina out, or we have something that's allowing all of our planeswalkers to just really get a lot of good stuff. We want Spark Double to come down and copy something good. We might want another planeswalker. Whereas, let's say if we have the +1/+1 counter strategy set up, or we got something like Tekkathal down on that, I think we really want Spark Double to become Tekkathal, and then setting up that strategy. So I think I like Spark Double because there's a lot of versatility. Tekkathal we talked about already. Flying, if you would proliferate twice instead. Then for 1 and 2 Phyrexian blue, we can remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, or planeswalker control, which is going to be very easy. So basically, for 1 mana, 4 life, and 3 counters, we can make it indestructible. Hopefully that stops anyone from removing it with a board wipe or anything like that, and we can still use that double proliferate ability on our opponents. Toxrill is one of my kind of fun cards in the deck. My answer to try to hurt our opponents just a little bit. At the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control, and creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter. And whenever creature you don't control with a slime counter it dies, you make a 1/1 slug. This is cool because with Toxrill and Atraxa out, they're both start of end step abilities, which means you can do Toxrill first and then do Atraxa, and you can hopefully start just ringing out your opponent's creatures with those -1/-1 counters. We get the slugs, and then we can pay 2 mana and sack a slug to draw a card. Toxrill is a house by itself. No, it doesn't have Infect. No, it doesn't have Toxic, but I think it's one of those cards that's going to just help us disrupt our opponents as well. Vishgraz, the Doom Hive, going to come in and get us a couple mites. Menace Toxic 1, so it can hopefully get some of that toxic damage through, but it gets +1/+1 for each poison counter our opponents have. This is a commander and it's all right. If you're interested in Vishgraz, I have a video I just released a week or so ago on the channel. But I think if it's a perfect slot for this deck as being another creature that has toxic on it that we can start getting the counters train going. We can get those might tokens, which will help us out as well. And I think it's just overall a good card. It's a decent blocker on the ground. It has menace, so it's going to be hard to block. And I think it just fits into our poison style of the strategies. All right. 9 planeswalkers, not too many, but the goal is that we should see them, at least one of them every game, if not more than one, depending on if we're searching for them or if we're trying to find them. A Johnny Eternal Sleeper. We can look at the top card with the +1, but the real thing we care about this is the -3 can put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to among up to 3 creatures, and then they gain vigilance. This is going to help us spread those +1/+1 counters out. But the -6 says whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, a target opponent gets 2 poison counters. This is going to help us spread those poison counters out. Or it allows us to use its other abilities to do things like that. Johnny the Great-Hearted, creatures we control have vigilance. This means we can kind of freely attack because we'll be able to sit back and block. And the -2 puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature and a loyalty counter on each other planeswalker we control. So it doesn't put the loyalty counter back onto a Johnny. But what it's going to do is start spreading the love out to all the rest of our stuff, and I think it's going to help push us forward. Kasmina has a fun ability. Each of the planeswalker you control has the loyalty abilities of Kasmina and Enigma Sage, so each of them can +2 to scry 1. That's pretty great, because there's things in there that let us draw, but really just +2ing instead of +1ing on some planeswalkers could be really important, especially when we're dealing with Ichormoon Gauntlet. -X to make a 0/0 blue and fractal creature token and put X +1/+1 counters on it. This is great for things like Herald of Secret Streams if we need to do that. And then -8, search for an instant or sorcery card that shares a color with this planeswalker. The best part about that is when we have something else using that ability, it basically opens up the different cards we can get. And you exile that card, then you go play that card without paying its mana cost. So that's pretty cool because it can go get us some different things. Nissa, Steward of the Elements, +2, scry 2. That's great because we can build its loyalty up. 0, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card or a creature card with CMC or mana value less than the amount of loyalty on Nissa, put that right onto the battlefield. And that's pretty great because the higher we make Nissa, the more of a chance we have of just dumping these big creatures out of our deck down for free. And then -6 up to 2 target lands you control. Come 5/5. Elementals with flying and haste, and they're still lands. So that just gives us some attackers if need be. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. First, the +1/+1 side of our deck goes. Probably one of the best. Just comes out for 3 mana, -2 to put a counter on each creature. Same thing with the Johnny. Those two really fit into this +1/+1 counter strategy. Putting counters on all of our things. +1 can give us a token. -7, gain X, draw X. X is the number of lands. So that's pretty solid. And then Teferi Master Time, one of the more important planeswalkers in the deck as far as this kind of mini extra turn spells things go, but especially the proliferating. We can use his abilities at any time that we could cast an instant on any player's turn. So we can use actually Teferi once per turn. More often than not, we're doing that draw on a discard. But we can -3 to phase a creature out. It basically is treated like it isn't there and comes back in on that player's upkeep. And then -10, take 2 extra turns after this one. This one is actually really important because you'll note that it says take 2 extra turns after this one. Meaning if we use this on an opponent's turn, we get 2 extra turns in that turn order to do if we need to. This could potentially make the game for us. It could stop some other players from going off. This could do a lot of great things for us. And if we have Ichormoon Gauntlet out, this means we could be proliferating on everyone's turn. So this becomes, in my opinion, pretty important. This is one of the most important planeswalkers to pair with Ichormoon Gauntlet just due to what it can do. I also think that Teferi Temporal Mage is a pretty great thing to do with that. This is draw cards, you put a loyalty on. Whenever you draw a card, you put a loyalty on or counter on Teferi Temporal Mage. 0 just draws this card. -2 makes us a spirit that says whenever you draw a card, put a counter on it. This is great because these are more creatures with +1/+1 counters that factor into that strategy. -12 is like a midi Cyclonic Rift for only one player. Teferi, each opponent can cast spells only at the time they can cast sorcery. This is going to stop removal and things like that on our turns. Till our next turn, we can cast sorceries as though they had flash. And then -3 lets us put a target artifact, creature, or enchantment into its owner's hand and draw a card. This can kind of bounce some things away. And then probably the newest planeswalker on this list, Vraska Betrayal, staying 0 to draw a card and lose a life, and we proliferate. That's great because, again, this is another instance of proliferating. -2 to turn a creature into a treasure. and it loses all other types and abilities. This locks down a lot of things. It's 6 mana, but this locks down a lot of things. And then -9, a target player has fewer than 9 poison counters. They gain a number of poison counters equal to the difference. The cool part about this is if someone has less than 9 and you have a doubling season out, or sorry, you have Vorinclex out, you could actually choke someone out with poison counters with just this ability. But more often than not, this is going to bring someone up to 9. We proliferate, knock that player out, and then keep going or work on the other players. So let me know what you guys think of Atraxa down in the comments. Again, this is a deck that honestly I didn't think I would like. Atraxa has always been a commander I've had mixed opinions on. But now that I see a lot of the way that this works, this takes a deck I've been really wanting to try, which is Spara Planeswalkers, Spara Super Friends, using the +1/+1 counters to play cards off the top of your library and kind of using the Proliferate that way. I think it does everything I want that deck to do, but it adds all of the poison stuff that's just going to help you, I think, win more. So this is a deck, honestly, I might be interested in trying. I didn't really realize that until I finished up the deck, but let me know what you think down in the comments. Like I said, if you want to join me and making more of this content, subscribe if you want to see me out brew your favorite Magic channel. I love brewing, and this is one of the perfect examples of a deck that definitely changed my mind when I finally got done brewing it. But hey, our time with Phyrexia LB1 is almost done, to be 100% honest. There's not many more commanders that I really want to brew. That's okay. I think that it happens sometimes. There's definitely been sets in the past where I feel like it's been about the same, where there haven't been a ton of commanders that I wanted to brew, but it's going to work out well, one, because March of the Machines is coming. We've already seen plenty of legendaries from that set. There's going to be plenty of things for me to brew. If you would like to see me make individual decks for each of the 5 Dominuses, just let me know down in the comments. I'd still love to do those. Some of them are kind of more interesting than others, but I have no problem doing that. And the second is, in just a small amount of time, my wife and I will be having our first kiddo. And that means that some of my output may be a little bit lessened for the next week or 2 or 3. Just know that I am living life, and I will be doing my best to get content up for you guys. This is still something that's my priority, and I will make it my priority. But that is important too, and I need to do that. And I will be in contact as soon as I can, as frequently as I can, even amidst the no sleep that is to come. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will